All right, let's do something really interesting. We're going to dig deep, way deep, into our evolutionary past. And we're going to uncover a story that might be very different from the one you think you know.
This whole explainer is really built around a pretty bold statement from the source material. It's designed to challenge one of our most fundamental assumptions about, well, human nature. Because if male dominance isn't baked into our DNA, then what is?
And that's the big question, right? That's what we're going to try and figure out. But to get there, we first have to take apart a really old and honestly a very persistent myth.
Okay, so first up, evolution's biggest myth. We're unpacking the whole man-the-hunter story. I'm sure you've seen this picture a million times, right? Man, the heroic provider. The story goes that the challenges of hunting huge animals were the main engine of our evolution, driving everything from our big brains to our first tools, while, the story goes, women just waited around.
Okay, but here's where that whole story starts to get some major cracks. When we actually look at modern foraging societies, our best guess for what early human life was like, the data is crystal clear. Hunting big animals, it's not the main course, not even close. The vast majority of calories, 70%, actually comes from gathering.
And this is the really critical takeaway. The source argues it's not just that the old story is missing a few details, it's that it's probably completely backwards. The whole idea that hunting is what drove our evolution, well, that's likely just wrong, which means the real drivers have to be hiding somewhere else.
So, if it wasn't hunting, what was it? Well, let's follow the evidence. We're going to look at the real toolmakers, using clues from both primates and ancient stone.
If you look at our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, this whole man-the-toolmaker idea gets completely flipped on its head. It's actually the females who are the real tool gurus. They're the innovators, the primary users, the skilled ones. And crucially, they're the ones who teach this know-how to their kids.
And guess what? The rocks tell the exact same story. Our earliest stone tools, they weren't spears or arrowheads. They were basically prehistoric food processors. Think chalkers and scrapers, perfect for gathering tasks like cracking open nuts or getting the marrow out of bones or shucking shellfish. And just look at this number, 3.3 million years. That's how long these simple processing tools were the peak of our technology. It just goes to show you that gathering and processing food was absolutely central to our survival for a huge chunk of our history, way before complex hunting was even a thing. So all of this, the diet, the tools, it all points to a really fascinating new theory for how we made our first giant leap as a species. It's about wading toward humanity, and it tackles one of the absolute biggest puzzles in our evolution. Yeah, think about it. The classic answer for why we started walking on two legs was always tied to hunting, right? To see over the tall grass, to free up our hands for weapons. But if hunting wasn't the main gig, then what on earth could explain such a massive evolutionary change? Okay, so the source material lays out something called the coastal hypothesis, and it's a completely female-driven idea. The logic is actually pretty simple. First, the need. Growing those big, brainy babies we're known for takes a ton of very specific nutrients, things like omega-3s. Second, the source. Where do you find those? Well, they're packed into coastal foods like shellfish and fish eggs. So, third, the innovation. What's the best way for a mother, who might even be carrying a child, to get that food out of the water? Simple. Stand up. Walking upright frees your hands to gather all that brain food. And what's so cool about this theory is just how many different puzzles it seems to solve all at once. For one, it explains why we started walking upright before our brains got big, because waiting for food gave us the fuel we needed for that brain growth. It also helps make sense of why so many of our earliest fossils are found near ancient lakes and coastlines. Okay, so if our evolution was driven by mothers gathering food for their brainy kids, what does that mean for how we actually lived together? That takes us to our next big idea, our forgotten social structure, a world powered by grandmothers and matrilines. This brings us to something called the grandmother hypothesis. Humans are one of the only species where females live for decades after they stop reproducing. Evolutionarily, that's kind of weird, right? It would only make sense if older females gave a huge survival boost to the group. And the idea is that they absolutely did. They were like living libraries of knowledge, and they were essential caregivers for their grandkids, which dramatically increased their chances of survival. And this whole social world was likely built around what the source calls the matrilineal core. The idea here is that our basic social unit, it wasn't the nuclear family we think of today.
No, it was a network of related women, mothers, daughters, aunts, sisters, all working together, cooperating to raise the kids. In this kind of setup, males were often a bit more on the periphery of that core group.
So here's the big takeaway. According to all this evidence, this female-centered, cooperative way of life wasn't some rare exception. For hundreds of thousands of years, it was probably the norm. And that means patriarchy isn't our biological destiny. It's a pretty recent invention in the grand scheme of things, not something that's been hardwired into our DNA from the very beginning.
And that brings us right back to the beginning, and to the final question the source material leaves us with. If we understand that our deep, deep past was likely built around cooperation and female innovation, well, that opens up totally new ways of thinking about our present. It really makes you ask, if that was our history, what could our future look like?